I'm Craig Loper. Welcome into this week's Washington Huddle web exclusive, joined by Scott Jackson, post-game host for the Washington football team. Washington heading into the bye week, Scott, and 2-6, not looking so good. What's the narrative around this team right now amongst all the struggles? But kind of break it down, maybe one thing specifically for me.
Well, look, it's a lot of people just projecting, how do they get out of this mess, right? In the long term, how do you find that quarterback? And that's really what the focus is now, and it feels really desperate because you look at a draft class that's coming up that is not really stocked and loaded. It's supposed to be lesser than this year's class, and this year's class hasn't been very good, quite frankly. So I think it concerns people. Then you start looking at free agency and some trades, and there's nothing really that jumps out at you that makes a ton of sense right now for this team. So it's going to be, kind of similar to last year. Like, where do they go with that position? What do they do? And are they, in another situation where they're kicking the can down the road for another season on trying to find that future guy that's supposed to lead this franchise? And I think that's what's got a lot of fans really pretty depressed moving forward here, quite frankly.
Yeah, Scott, you sort of touched on it, but I want to go into further detail with this. The trade deadline just passed. Washington makes really no moves of note. I personally thought maybe Stephon Gilmore was a guy that should have been in the mix a couple of weeks ago. Maybe it was a cap situation, but why nothing at the deadline for Washington?
Yeah, I just don't think they saw anything that made sense. I think certainly if somebody would have called and taken Landon Collins and his contract off their hands, they would have done that. Even though he is playing better right now, just because I don't see him as somebody who fits in the future beyond this season. And then people talked about Brandon Sheriff around here, but they like Sheriff. And the other problem is Sheriff's been hurt. And that's a big number. I don't think it was realistic for a team to pick up that number for a guard. It doesn't make any sense. So that was probably somebody they could have let go or, could have moved on from if they could have gotten out of the contract again. But I just don't think there was a market for it. There's some talk about them maybe trying to get Mitchell Trubisky from the Bills. Which never materialized. Maybe the price was too high, or maybe the Bills thought better of it in case, something happened to Josh Allen and they needed him to play and they, wanted an experienced quarterback there. So, I just don't, probably just something that didn't make any sense for them. And, in terms of like them being a buyer for a player for a team that's, a player or two away, like the Rams, getting Von Miller. I mean, that obviously didn't make sense for this team because they're more than one player away from doing anything.
Hey, Scott, and speaking of one important player for this defense, Montez Sweat looks like he's going to miss a significant amount of time. Tell us about his injury.
Yeah, they think he fractured his jaw in that Rams game in the early report, or excuse me, the Broncos game in those early reports. And that's going to be tough because you're talking about several weeks of not having Montez Sweat, which, means James Smith-Williams, who's played well for them, will get more time. Shaka Toney, the rookie out of Penn State, who they like. So some of these younger guys will get a chance to play more and, to show what they've got. And they're just going to have to step up. And as I said earlier, I mean, look, Chase Young needs to step up. Chase Young has not been the same guy. Teams have figured out what he likes to do. He's got to get more of a repertoire of pass rush moves. Can't just be a speed rush guy in year two. They figured that out. So hopefully he can step his game up. And we know the interior with Jonathan Allen and Payne and Ioannidis have been pretty rock solid this year.
Yeah, Scott, and I want to get to a little bit of a positive note here. And listen to this stat for me. Weeks 2 through 6, Washington, the defense, was giving up 34 points per game. But the last 2 weeks, they've allowed just 20 against the Packers and the Broncos. So what's Ron Rivera saying about this halfway point in the season and what he thinks they can do and accomplish moving forward in the back half?
Well, he obviously thinks they can be a lot better. I mean, usually his teams do get better in the second half of the season. This team last year got better under Ron Rivera as the season went on, and that was with what was supposed to be the harder part of the schedule in the second half. So we'll see if they can do that. Look, if they can hold the Buccaneers to 20 points, I mean, good for them coming out of the bye because that's going to be a huge challenge, obviously. But after that, things soften up a little bit with teams like the Panthers are spinning their wheels. They'll get the Eagles twice. Cowboys twice is going to be tough. Obviously, they're really good this year. Look at the Giants again. The Seahawks without Russell Wilson's nothing really to be afraid of, but still a tough game. So they'll have a little bit lesser of a schedule on their side. Maybe that'll help them out a little bit, but you just like to think these guys should keep working through this stuff and learning from these mistakes they made in the early season and, just play them one at a time. That's all I can do at this point, Craig. I mean, they've built this enormous hole for themselves and they're going to have to try to, climb out of it.
He is Scott Jackson, post-game radio show host for the Washington football team. And this has been the Washington Huddle web exclusive. Thanks for joining us.